You're righty there, fellow mini painters and lovers of all things old home related, and welcome to another video from Nostalgiahammer Hobbies, where I'm going to be trying to take these bits and some green stuff and put it together to make an Exalted champion for a second edition 40k Chaos army. It's the first time I've tried something like this, so it's going to be interesting to see how it turns out. So let's go through the video and find out. When the second edition of Warhammer 40k came out, inside it had the Codex Imperialis. This book had basically everything in it that you would need to run any army, including all sorts of background fluff, and this is now a much sought after book. It's got some great background lore in it and some absolutely brilliant illustrations and artwork. It's got all the stuff you'd need for everything, including your Space Marines. It would have all the background fluff for the Imperium. It's got any rules that you might need for the Imperial Guard. Basically, all the stuff that appeared in here eventually got its own codex. So you'd have like the Eldar as well. There was even a real golden oldie in here that sadly never got their own codex. Didn't appear much, they didn't get any extra models or anything, but they did exist. And then what we do is we come to the Chaos section. In the Chaos section, this has everything for your demons and everything. And what you'll see when you get to the Chaos Space Marines part is for leadership choices, what you've got is options for mighty heroes and champions. And you could do these up as anything from a champion, hero, and a mighty hero. I can remember that there were some models that were released, but I can't really seem to find any. There were some absolutely beautiful examples for the Warhammer Fantasy range, but I can't remember much for the actual Warhammer 40k one being out. And then we got the Chaos Codex that came out. And with the release of this one, the rules for the mighty champions got upgraded a little bit and you could turn them into Exalted champions. And we got some more models for these actually come out then. We got some for the Space Marine ones, as well as there was a few for Khorne and for Nurgle. But there weren't actually that many. But what we did get a lot of in the Chaos Codex, which was really lovely, was lots of photos of converted champions. And these gave you all sorts of ideas you could do with Terminators, the ordinary Space Marines as well, turn them into them, as well as this one example that's absolutely gorgeous by John Blanche from back in the day. After looking at those pictures in the Chaos Codex, I really wanted to give it a go myself and see if I can convert up an Exalted champion for a Chaos Force as well. I would like to do this one themed for a Slaanesh Force, and I'm going to do it along the lines of the same thing for that Chaos Dreadnought that I did previously. So it's going to be Emperor's Children themed as well. So grab yourself a cuppa, let's go to the painting desk and see how I did. Before I start with showing you how to do the conversions, I've got a little tip for you when it comes to putting pins in for doing things like arm repositioning. It's a good little idea, for me at least, to make the hole a bit bigger than you actually need it to be for the paperclip part. And then it's got a little bit of wiggle room, so that'll make repositioning a little bit easier. What I'll do is I'll put a little blob of super glue where you're going to put the arm on, and then I push the arm in there and just hold it in place nicely. Now this Power Fist doesn't actually really need too much repositioning because it's got a nice sort of pose to it. Some super glue activator will do the job nicely. The next thing I want to do is increase the size of his general silhouette to make him look more imposing. And for that, what I want to do is position his chainsword so it's sticking out from his side a little bit more than it is right now. So at the moment it's just a little bit too snug into his the side of him, and it just makes the silhouette a little bit too small. So what I'm going to do is I'll put a nice blob of super glue in there, put the pin into it, be careful that you don't drop it like I just did, and then once you've got that in there, put a little bit of super glue on the side of the chainsword arm, and you hold it out into the position that you want a little bit more, and then with the super glue activator put in there, that'll help to hold it in place quite nicely, just like that. The next stage I'm going to do is fill this gap in and sculpt in some extra little trunking bits. The best way to do that is roll your green stuff out into a little bit of sausage and pick little bits off it and just slowly poke them in. I'm using a sculpting tool there to do this as well. And you want to also make sure that you're keeping your tools damp when you do it. Have a little pot of water next to you and just dip them into it. Don't want it wet and dripping, just damp enough so the green stuff doesn't stick to your modelling tools. And just keep going backwards and forwards, adding little bits of green stuff into it until you're happy with where you are. Now I've got the gap filled in, I'm going to sculpt in the sort of trunking that you see in between their joints. But I'm going to use the back of a craft knife and just press it in lines. And I'm also going to use a cocktail stick. This isn't probably the best tool to use, but as long as I'm keeping it moist, then it's not sticking to the green stuff. It's probably better to use a needle or something like that. But this cocktail stick is working reasonably well, and it's carrying on and it's serviceable. And with that, I think that actually looks pretty decent. I'm quite surprised with how well that's come out, and it wasn't really too difficult to do. Just patiently going in with the back of the craft knife and the cocktail stick has made it look actually quite passable. I'm very pleased with that. Next thing I'm doing is I'm going to make his backpack look a little bit better. For that, what I've got is a plastic totem top from Chaos Kit, and I've used a paperclip, and I've just drilled a hole into the top of the backpack, poked the paperclip into it, and then in the back of the totem where the paperclip goes in, I've used some sprue goo to fill in that gap and just cover it over and help it hold better. The first stage I'm going to do is I'm going to get a decent needle file, and I'm going to file this down nice and flat and flush with it so that it's not raised up, because it had a little bit of a raised surface to it when I plopped the sprue glue all over it, and it files down nice and easily with a decent nail file. Next, what I want to do is I want to add a little bit of metal holding on the totem to the back of the paperclip that I've got in here, so it looks like a little band of metal that's there. And what I'm going to do is mix the green stuff and got it nice and thin, pressed it between my fingers, and I'm using the actual totem next to it to gauge the size a little bit better. And I'm just using the craft knife to snip off the ends of it, just to get it to the sort of length that I want. Once I've done that, I'm just going to pick it up gently with the end of the sculpting tool like that and just place it on the end. Green stuff is quite sticky by itself, so it will stick to the plastic part quite nicely. And I don't want to smush it flat and blur it in, smoothing it out. I actually want this to look like a separate metal band. Once I've got it in place, I'll then use a craft knife just to skin it down to the right sort of size, as well as using a sculpting tool to shape it as well a little bit. Next up, what I want to do is make a cloak for this guy, and that will really help to give a little bit more size to his silhouette. Now, what I did was I actually watched quite a few videos on YouTube to give you an idea of how to do this, because I've never attempted it before. The video that helped me the most was one by a guy called Tom Mason. It's about a 7-year-old video, but he's still on YouTube going. He's mostly a sculptor from what I can see. And I'm going to link the video in the description below, and I highly recommend that if you haven't heard of his channel and you fancy doing this sort of stuff, to go and subscribe to his channel and see what he's got. Now what you're going to do is use a jewellery bag or some description for this one. Put some Vaseline on it to make sure the green stuff doesn't stick too much, and sort of get it into the sort of shape that you want. I'm using a silicone sculpting tool there as well to help do it. And then the advantage of doing it on a baggie like this is that when you want to line it up and see if it's about the right size, what you can do is literally just line it up to the model where you want it and sort of drape it over it to see if it's the right sort of shape and that lot. And once you're happy with that, or at least the rough of it, then what I wanted to do was add a sort of tattied textured edge to it. So I'm going to go in with a craft knife and just kind of snip little bits away from the edge of it. You can do as much or as little of this as you want. I'm just going for like 2 or 3 little bits, and you just sort of cut them out and then pick them out. Then once you've got it to that sort of point where you're happy with the right sort of bits of tears or anything else like that, it will peel nicely off the actual plastic of the bag. And then what you can do is cut around any excess that's on it. If you're using craft like I'm doing here, be very, very careful. This is sped up quite a lot, and I'm being quite careful when I'm doing this. And you can even take it off the model again and just put it back on the bag to cut off any excess like I did there. And then you just drape it over the model. And what I do is I'm using a sculpting tool there just to sort of get it into its initial shape where I want it. And then I'm going to go back in with my knife and start snipping away the excess. Because I want to be able to have the symbol that's on the shoulder pad here visible. And it's quite easy to do it. Again, make sure your tools are a bit wet so it doesn't stick to the green stuff, and you can just cut them away. And what I'm doing here is I'm kind of going in with modelling tools again and starting to sculpt in some creases and folds into it. And you can just go back and forwards with it until you're happy with the sort of look that you've got. And don't try and agonise over getting it absolutely perfect. Now here, if you have to go back in and do a little bit of an adjustment, you can do. Now I'm going back in with the sculpting tool at this bit here. And again, just putting in some of those creases that we want. And what I'll do is I will just go backwards and forwards with this and try and fold the cloak round to where I want it in the sort of a shape that I'd want. Move it away from the model if you want to, whatever, anything like that. And do that whilst the green stuff's still pliable and it's nice and easy to do it. And just go backwards and forwards until you're happy with what you've got. And then what I'm going to do, to make it look like it's part of the armour a little bit more, I poke a couple of little holes in it with a cocktail stick, and then I'm going to snip the ends off them, just the little pointy ends of them. And I'm going to use them as sort of spikes that are sticking out of the chest plate of his armour. And then what I'm going to do is just take a little bit of super glue. It helps if you put it on something next to you, like a bit of plastic. And I'm just going to stick the little spiky bits into the little holes that I've just poked in the end. And that helps to add that nice little finishing touch to it. And with that, that is all the green stuff done and any of the position altering that I wanted to do. I mean, this has made him look a little bit more exalted and a little bit more like a special miniature. And it really wasn't that bad to do. Like, for a first time attempt, I'm quite pleased with how it's turned out. And I very much encourage anybody else that's thinking of doing this to give it a go themselves. Very pleased with the results, I reckon, and it's definitely worth a go. Before we go on to the painting process for this model, I just wanted to say to people that anybody out there who's wanting to give this a go, genuinely give it a go. Other than the first time when I tried doing the Aquila out of the green stuff using the decal as a stencil to do it, I've never done anything like this before. And the entire process, including the arm repositioning and filling in and sculpting the ducting or whatever it was, the cabling in between those arms, only took me about 40 odd minutes. And that was even with a little mistake where I didn't like the initial shape of the cloak. And I re-smushed it back together and flattened it out again and started again with the process. There are also an awful lot of videos out on YouTube for you to watch for any extra tips for it. And they'll be able to explain it a lot better than I explained it. Because again, this is my first time. Now, if you like it and if you think this is quite good, I can only really encourage all of you to give this a go. It's great fun to do it and you might well be very pleased with it. And remember, as a little PSA thing, everybody wants to strive for perfection. But just remember, the hardest thing to learn and the best thing you can learn once you get it is what your level of perfection is. Once you find that, the level of achievement and satisfaction you will get from your paint jobs will go up through the roof and it will really increase the process for you. At least it does for me once I found this. Now, with that little PSA out of the way, let's get to the painting desk, put some paint to this little beauty, and finish this off, shall we? To start off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some Phoenician purple through my airbrush onto the model. Now, the airbrush I'm using is a Sparmax SP-35C. They're reasonably cheap airbrushes, to be honest, about 50 odd 60 quid if you can find them for the right price. So that's not too bad at all. We're just going to use this as an all-over base colour for the purple armour. And then from that, I'm going to go up to Chemos Purple. This is going to be used to cover pretty much all of the Phoenician Purple that I've done. Just leaving the Phoenician Purple in the darkest parts that there are. And that way, what it'll do is it'll build up the nice starting of the transition going up to a nice bright purple. From that, I'm going to jump up to Gene Stealer Purple and still apply this through the airbrush. I'm going to use this as a little bit more targeted. We're just going to put this on the most raised areas, including on the chest. We're going to want to pick out the front of that as well, just to help it stand out and just be that little bit more brighter. And there you can see that it's built up a nice little transition where it's starting to get a bit brighter and it's building its way up. From that, I'm going to use the final purple I'm going to jump up to, which is going to be Cacophony Purple. This is quite bright, almost looks like it's bordering on pink, but don't worry, when you apply this down, this is going to be used as a properly just on the very raised areas, like the centre of the chest, top of the power fist, and any parts on his body that are like the very toppermost parts and look like they're actually going to be catching the light. And after that, I'm going to do his chainsword and the claws on his power fist. I've started by base coating them both in Caliban Green, and I'm going to start by applying Warped Stone Glow over that, and I'm going to use a brush to do it on the claws of the power fist. And I'm going to leave the darker Caliban Green just in the very recesses around the joint edges of each of the fingers. And go around. This is going to take several coats to do it, because Warped Stone Glow does not have very good coverage at all. As you're doing that, just keep going back and forwards over a few coats and you'll get there a nice solid coat. And a little tip when you're mixing paints up for the airbrush, is do them in a separate pot, not in your container, in your airbrush pot. And you want them to be mixed down to a consistency where they're literally running down the inside of your mixing cup. And this will help them go through the airbrush a lot easier and a lot better. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this on the chainsaw to begin with, and I'm going to cover most of the Caliban green, but leave it right down the base of the chainsaw. So we start to get a nice transition building up from the darker green going up through to a lighter green. And just keep working it backwards and forwards over a few coats. And once you get hand of the trigger control, this isn't too bad really. And then what I've done is I've masked the model up using a flimsy sandwich bag and some masking tape. So you could just poke some holes into it and poke the part through that you want to airbrush. Wrap the sandwich band round and seal it up with some masking tape. And that way you're not going to get any of the green over the rest of the purple that we've just done. I'm then going to be using Moot Green through the airbrush. And I'm going to be building this up into a nice brighter transition. I'm going to start with chainsaw. And again, I'm going to cover most of the warp stone glow that I've done, but not all of it. I'm going to leave some of the warp stone glow visible down at the very base of our transition. And again, build this up over a few coats so you don't get any runs. And it'll steadily build it up to a nice bright colour. I'm then going to do the talons of the power fist. This one, again, once you've learned a bit of trigger control, this isn't too bad and fiddly to do. I'm just going to ease it back slowly by spritzing it on there and working back from the tips of the talons downwards. And try and only just hit the final joint on those talons there. And this will build up the final transition that we want. After that, what I'm going to do is cloak. And I'm going to use Ushapti bone for a base on that. Thin this down, and it's going to take a couple of coats to get it over with, but it's worth it to get a nice smooth coat because it's such a large area. And with that done, it's got a nice smooth coat on it. And I've also done the flag banner thingy on the top of his trophy rack that's on the banner pole. After that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the purple armour and I'm going to tone it down a little bit by mixing Magos Purple and Contrast Medium to 3 parts Magos Purple to 1 part Contrast Medium. So it's a fairly diluted mix. And we're just going to put this all over the purple armour, not thickly or anything. We're going to use this as kind of a reasonably thick glaze. We want some of it to settle in the recesses, but not all of it. And we're also going to do the backpack, which we've also done purple. After that, I'm going to move on to doing the jointing between their armour and that lot. And I'm going to use Eshin Grey for this. And this is going to see whether or not I've actually done a good job with the sculpting part on here or not. And fingers crossed it'll come out alright by the end of this. Then next, I want to move on and do some metallics. But first, I want to base coat this Chaos Icon in Mornfang Brown. Because I'm using a brass colour for this. And brasses usually come out a lot better if you've got a brown base coat to help bring out the richness of the colour. And then over that, I'm going to use Brass Scorpion. Just apply that over in a couple of thin coats, get a nice even coverage all over it. And that will be quite a nice brass to counterpoint with the purple. Then after that, I jump on to Lead Belcher. And that's just for any of the metallic areas that you want to do. On this one, I'm doing the chain of the chainsaw, some engine parts. And there's a couple of parts on his backpack as well. And there we go, with those metallics done. He's also done the spikes on his icon for that as well. And you can see the cut little bits that I picked out. After that, I'm going to jump up and I'm going to use Balthazar Gold. And this is going to be for some of the other brassy areas. I'm going to use this on the detailing around the edge of the chainsword. And I'm also going to put this on any of the other chaosy icons that are on his body, like the arrows that are on his chest. There's one on his groin, and there's the stars on his power fist as well. And then I do the gold areas. With that, I'm going back to the Vallejo's Liquid Metal Rich Gold. This is an alcohol-based paint, remember, so do not wash your brush out with water. Wash it out in isopropyl alcohol. And this is, again, I've said it before and I'm going to say it again, this is one of my favourite golds, if not my favourite gold to use. Such a beautiful paint, it goes down so well. And then after that, I go to Ironbreaker. And that's what I'm going to use on any of the silver parts that I want. So it's going to be his little chain on his waist there. You've got the knuckles on his power fist as well, I'm going to do in this, to give a little bit of separation between the purple of the fist and the green of the talons. There's also a couple other little areas like odd little skulls and that Slaneshi icon on his shoulder. Then I'm going to do a skull that's on here, and I'm going to use Sandry Dust on this and just get this all over the skull in a nice thin even coat, and also do these little pair of monsters' teeth that are hanging down here with this as well. And then I'm going to go back to Mornfang Brown for the little straps that's holding the Slaneshi icon onto his shoulder. Nice thin brush. If I haven't mentioned it, just in case, I'm using a size 0 from Rosemary & Co. Long bristles, but very thin point. I really like using this brush. Then I do this little lens that he's got on his power fist here in Cantor Blue, ready to do that up to a nice bright shine. And then what I do is I'm going to do the cabling on his power fist and on his backpack, and I'm going to do the colour blending method that I did on the Dreadnought again. And I'm going to use Imperial Fists first of all, and go down just past halfway, and then jump up to Warp Lightning afterwards. And sort of go backwards and forwards on this cable here, mixing it together. You don't have to use a lot of Warp Lightning, because it's a lot richer than the yellow. And then on the little pipes around here on his backpack, I'm going to do the same. This shows that you can do it on a very small little area. Just do like just over halfway with the yellow, and then mix in the green with a little bit thinner, working your way up to it, and then go backwards and forwards between the two, mixing them in. And with that done, that actually looks pretty decent. It manages to blend through quite nicely, even on these small little pipes, and it does add a nice little touch to it. Now what I'm going to do is the helmet on the Imperial Guard skull that's sitting here. Initially I did it green like they are today, but then when I look back in some old artwork, I saw that they're supposed to actually be black, not that khaki green. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to base coat this in Abaddon Black and just do it all over it in a couple of nice thin coats. And with the Abaddon Black, what I'm also going to do is the little spines that's holding his cloak into place, and there's also one just tucked under his arm that's poking through the cloak round the back of it. And then do the little red details on the helmet with Mephiston Red, and the little straps with Talarn Sand. Now when it comes to the Chaos Star on the banner, the reason you're seeing me do this when I've got a fair way bit through it is because, to be quite honest, I couldn't for the life of me work out what colour to do it in. I was going through the usual reds or blues or golds maybe, but I didn't think any of them would work properly. So what I did was actually got my colour wheel out again. And if you look on the colour wheel, you'll see that where we've got the purpley violet for the armour, just above the yellowy green that I've got going around the power claws, you've got different sorts of colour matches, like in triads. And if you'll see on one of them, it goes off to a bluey green. And so I decided for that to go with Sotek Green as a base for this and work up through it. And the good thing is with doing this, if you are really stuck when it comes to something like this, and you're not entirely sure what the colour wheel's going to produce when you take the colour that it's given you, you can always just repaint it. So it's not like it's a huge mistake or anything, or a massive hassle to redo this. So I would highly recommend getting yourself a colour wheel if you haven't got one, and having a look at it and seeing what you can work out for some colour ideas. Now I'm going to move on to doing the washes. And to begin with, I'm going to do a panel line with Shyish Purple. To do this, what I use is my Army Painter Masterclass brush. As you can see, it's got some extremely fine detailed pointed bristles on it, and it's great for fine detail work like this. And as you can see, this panel lining doesn't add a huge amount to it, but it does help to define the edges of it and bring out that purple a little bit better, and help separate it out from the gold trim. So it is a touch I would recommend people do. And after that, I'm going to put Seraphim Sepia on the cloak. Put this all over it because this is going to add a nice sort of yellowy tint to it, which is what I'm trying to go for here. And you want to make sure when you're doing it on an area like this that you're not getting it pull up and getting any tea staining anywhere, or any nasty horrible blobs collecting up. And then after that, I'm going to start doing the gloss wash on the metallic areas, and I'm going to do it this time with a 2-part Nuln Oil to 1-part gloss varnish, and put this all over the any gunmetal areas, including any silver areas as well, like the chains and that one. Then afterwards, I'm going to do the same mix with Reichland Flesh Shade and the gloss varnish, and put that over any of the gold areas that are there, like the gold trim and anything that's on his sword. And then the last bit to get this sort of a mix is the bronzy areas, which is going to get a 2-part Agrax Earthshade with 1-part gloss varnish mix. And that's going to go over all of the brassy areas like this Chaos Icon and any of the other little tubes you might have done on the backpack, as well as the detailing that goes around the chainsaw like that. Then I'm just going to use straight Agrax Earthshade, and that's going to go over the skull here, and I'm also going to put it over the little pointed teeth, monster teeth that are on the totem as well. And then next up, I'm going to use Contrast Paint Talisar Blue, and I'm going to paint it directly into this little Slaneshi symbol that's engraved on the metal plate here to try and add a point of interest to it. and just to help it stand out that little bit more from the rest of it. And then it's going to be Nuln Oil, which we're going to do straight onto the joints between the armour. And finally, what I'm going to do is a panel lining again with the Masterclass brush with Quelia Green shade. And I'm just going to do this around the bronzy areas on the chainsaw, just to help emphasise the separation between the two areas. With the washes done, I can now move on to doing highlights. And what I'm going to start with is the cloak. And I'm going to begin by layering back up with Ushabti bone. Thin this down. It's going to take a few coats to get this nice smooth coverage over, but it'll be well worth it when it's done. And all you want to do is just leave the darker recesses that have been left over with the wash that we put in, and that'll help to start bringing out that detail. And with that first layer done, you can see this has really helped to bring out the detail on the cloak, as well as on the banner on top of his trophy rack. Next up, I'm going to go to a final highlight of Screaming Skull. And I'm just really going to do this around the very edges of any of the wrinkles that are on there. Some nice thin lines, as thin as you can make them, and just help that to pick it out. And as I work around the model, I'm just going to slowly try and pick out all the little details that I can. Next up, I'm going to highlight the Chaos symbol on his trophy rack. And for that, I'm going to begin by layering up with Temple Guard Blue. Thin this down a fair bit, and you can apply multiple layers of this, which will start to really help bring out the detail in it. And this one receives a final highlight of Baharoth Blue, which I'm just going to do over the very edges of it. This is a nice bright blue, and that will help to really make this thing stand out on top of the champion. Next up, I'm going to highlight these little leather straps, and I'm going to start by doing little dot hashes of Scrag Brown. Do these little stippling motions, it will give that impression of worn and damaged leather. And then to finish off that look, I'm going to go in with Deathcore Brown. And this is just going to be some very tiny little spots of highlighting going in there, just to add the little bits of scuffing detail. And that will help to complete these little straps. And for the metallics, I'm going to start with the silvery chains, and I'm going to be using Rune Fang Steel for this one. I'm just going to go around the very edges of all of the areas, and over the little chaosy icon that's on his shoulder there with the Slaneshi symbol. What I'm going to do is sort of stipple it on again, so it starts to give that impression of a texture to the actual metal without there being proper texture there. And as you pick out the edges of the little symbol like I'm doing just there, that'll really help to make that pop out on the model. And then I'm going to move on to the little bits in between his armour joints. And first of all, I'm going to pick out the detailing with Dawnstone. Just use your thin brush and go nice and carefully to pick out the raised areas. And then to finish that off, it's going to be Administratum Grey. This isn't really going to have very much of it put on there at all. It's just going to be on tiny little spots just to help it look like it's catching the light and shine that little bit. Next up, I'm actually going to do his trophy rack. And the bronze on that is going to be highlighted with Sycorax bronze. I'm just going to go around picking out the rivets and the edge of the actual brass icon itself. Just skimming the brush over the edge like that. And for the other coppery areas, like the tubing here on the back of his backpack and some of the stars that are on his armour, I'm going to use Hash Up Copper for that. And this is just pick out the tiny little edges of it. You don't really have to do this if you don't want to, but it does add that nice little touch. And then for the spikes on his trophy rack and any other of the gunmetal areas, I'm going to use Ironbreaker. And like on little round areas, like say the actual pole that's holding it up, what we want to do is just try and do a thin little line down the edge of it that you can actually see the most of. And that'll help to give the look of shine on there quite easily. And then from that, it's going to be the last of the gold areas. And now I'm going to use Liberator Gold. And this is going to be areas like the trim on his shoulder pads and the trim around his armour as well. And for that, you just turn the model sideways and just scrape it along nicely, like just doing the little edge highlight. And this will help to bring that bit out nicely. For the black areas, such as the Imperial Guard helmet that's on his trophy rack and the little spikes that are on his chest, I'm going to start by picking out the edges with Thunderhawk Blue. Just work around it carefully as you can and just picking these out. And to finish that off, I'm then going to do a final highlight of Rust Grey. This is just going to be on the final little points on the corners of the helmet here and help pick out any of the little cracks that we've painted on there. And then for the spikes on his armour that are holding the banner on and the one that's under his arm, I'm just going to try and do as thinner lines as I can going to the very tips of the spikes. And that's all you need to do for the black. Moving on to the green, I'm going to start with a highlight of Moot Green. This is only going to be done over the very base of the chainsword where the darkest green is. as well as just on the very first digit on his power fist. After that, I then jump up to Gauss Blaster green, and this is going to go over pretty much all of the other green that's there. Just work this round nicely. So on the chainsword, it's quite simple to do this. Just angle the chainsword round so you can skim it along the edge. And on the teeth, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of a highlight on the areas that would probably see the light where it's raised up. And as you can see, I'm just doing a little line just on the edge of the arrow, and then a tiny little line that connects to it. And that just helps to give that look of shine on there. And you don't have to go around picking out all of the little edges meticulously. As you can see, I'm picking out all of the edges of all the digits on his power fist as well. To finish this off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a mix of Gauss Blaster green and white scar. About 50-50 thereabouts. You just want it to be almost white. And this is just going to go on the very, very tips of the power fist fingers. It doesn't really need to go anywhere else. And I'm only doing this stage because this is going to be the centerpiece for the army and one of the characters leading it. So it just wants to have that little bit of extra pop to it. And for the color blended parts, I start again with Gauss Blaster green, and I'm just going to slowly and carefully flick the brush along there to pick out the edges of the actual detailing that's on the piping down there. You don't have to be insanely accurate with it. Just flick the brush across it and it'll give it the hint of it. I'm then going to use Dawn Yellow on the yellower parts, and that's going to carry on round there, just like that, just little tiny flicks of the brush as it goes. And then for the pipes on the back, what I'm going to do is a thin line of just Dawn Yellow going right around the edge of it. This one I'm using a size 0 from Rosemary & Co. Very nice brushes, and I highly recommend these as well, and they'll just help you to give that nice little thin line. For the armour, I'm going to start by using Decala Lilac. I'm just going to pick out all of the edges like this sort of thing, just here. And then for the armour panels, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go carefully around the edge where the wash is in the recesses, and just reinforce that line all the way around. Do that on all of the armour panels. And then finally, to finish this off, I'm going to do a mix of Decala Lilac and white. Again, about a 50-50 mix thereabouts, and it's just going to be done on areas like the rivets on the fist and any of just the pointy little corners of the shoulders. And anything like that, anywhere that would just be collecting the light and reflecting the light the most. And that just helps to add that extra little pop that we want for it being a character. And then finally, I'm going to do the lens that's on his power fist, and I'm going to start by layering Teclis Blue over the Cantor Blue. Thin this down, you do this over like 3 or 4 coats, and you just glaze it up so it steadily gets brighter as you go. After that, I'm going to do just a sort of an edge highlight with Lothern Blue, and just go around the very rim of the lens itself. And then to finish that off, a little bit of a line of white scar down at the bottom, and a little dot just at the top, and that will give that look of reflection. And now I've saved the best bit for last, and I'm going to do the face. I'm going to start off by giving it a base layer of Ulthuan Grey. It's going to go over all of it except the horns. Just build up a nice smooth coat of this all over. And there you go, that's what it looks like with the initial coat all over it, looking nice and bright. Next up, I'm going to base coat the horn and the tentacles coming out of his head, and I'm going to do that with Nagaroth Night. And again, thin this down and build it up over a few coats. Just keep going backwards and forwards until you've built up a nice solid coat of it. Now I want to apply a wash over this, and this is going to be a wash of 10 parts Shyish Purple Contrast Paint to 1 part Contrast Medium. It's going to be a very thin mix, but as you put this over, it will help all the detail to stand out, and it will make it a lot easier for highlighting later on. And then I'm going to use straight Shyish Purple Contrast over the horns and the tentacles, and help to enrich in that purple colour that we've got going on there. Right, I'm going to start by highlighting, and I'm going to layer back up with Ulthuan Grey, building it up over the face that I've done, and just going to leave all the recesses that have been shown by applying that wash and just steadily build it up. And as you build this up over several thin coats, you'll start to really help to get that detail to stand out. It's at this point that I decide I'm going to do the eye, and I'm going to do it black. So I take some Abaddon black, and I very, very carefully with my thinnest brush, my masterclass brush, I'm going to fill in the eye socket, just very carefully. If you make a bit of a mistake at this point, it doesn't really matter. You can go back in and tidy up. And then I'm going to start highlighting the face properly, and for that I'm going to go to White Scar. And I'm just going to very carefully and steadily pick out all of the raised areas on it and start really bringing that detail out. So it's going to be areas on his forehead, around his eyes, the top of his cheekbones, around his mouth, and anything like that. as well as I'm going to use this to put a tiny dot in the middle of his eye. This is something you're going to have to do very, very carefully. Next up, I'm going to start highlighting the horns, and for that I'm going to go to Xerius Purple. I'm just going to imagine there's some sharp lines on it and just carefully paint some thin lines going up a few bits of it like I'm doing here. And you work from the base of it and just start picking the horns out as you go with this. And this will help the horns to look a little bit sharper. And for the tentacle things on his head, I'm just going to do a bit of a line down the very top of each tentacle. Next up, I'm going to use Gene Stealer Purple. This one I'm going to start from just a little bit more than halfway along the horns and just start painting that up on the same lines that I've already done in the Xerius Purple to begin with. And try and, if you can, cover slightly less area than you did previously. And the same for the tentacles on the top of his head. It's just going to be slightly thinner lines and more towards the top of it. And then to complete that, I'm going to do a 50-50 mix of Gene Stealer Purple and White Scar. I'm just going to apply that on the very top of the horn and a little bit down the bottom of it to start adding a little bit of interest to it. And for the tentacles, just the tiniest little bit on the very top of them, just to help them look like they've got that little bit of shine. And to finish it off, I'm going to get my Masterclass brush again and some Screaming Skull, and I'm going to paint in his little teeth that are in his mouth. This is also something that's going to be a great test of your brush skill, but it is well worth the effort of making it immediately stand out and add that look. And there we have it. There's his face done, looking suitably evil and mutated, I think. And now he's ready to have transfer added and the base done. And then we are finished. And with his head finished, that's my Exalted champion for the Emperor's Children done. This was an awful lot of fun to give it a go, and I can only recommend that anybody else fancying this tries it. Don't worry about it, it wasn't nearly as daunting as I thought, and it's great fun. In the description below, I will link to Tom Mason's channel as well, and I can only recommend people go and look to them because that is a great resource for anybody that fancies doing this, as well as there's loads of other videos and channels out on YouTube. So please do go and have a good old browse through because there's a great resource with a great amount of tips in there. If you've liked this video, why not give us a like and maybe even give us a subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can be notified of any videos that come up in the future. Also in the description below there will be a link to my commission website. You can go there and have a look at any of the galleries and look at previous jobs that I've done, and maybe if you fancy it, get a quote for any commissions that you might fancy. And finally, let's go for the final reveal of this. And here I present him to you in all his glory, ready to lead the decadent forces of the Emperor's Children into battle against any and everyone. Originally I was going to go for that skull base, but when I finished painting the model I thought it looked a little bit over the top. And the green of this base actually really does help to accent off from the purple of the armour quite nicely. The decal I put on it is from one of the old Chaos sheets, and they're not too bad to come by, so that should be relatively easy for people to find if they fancy doing this as well. And with that, again, I'd just like to say if anybody did fancy giving this a go, really honestly I can only encourage them to do so. This was so much fun to try, and I really do honestly think the results are worth it. And for closing, I'd just like to say, stay happy and keep the old hammer alive.